with with most of our exhibits, we usually travel them, so we plan to continue to travel this exhibit once it closes on July 31st. So you may see it in other venues. Robb Kendrick is a native Texan born in Spur, Texas. He studied photography at East Texas State University, and after graduating, Robb received a summer internship with National Geographic. Since then, he has worked for Texas Monthly, Life, Sports Illustrated, Time, and Smithsonian magazines. He has completed 15 stories for National Geographic during the past decade. Robb has published 3 books of his tintypes, Revealing Character, Still, Cowboys at the Start of the 21st Century, and Changelings, the Tintypes of Mexican Mummies. Robb Kendrick is one of only a few photographers in the U.S. making tintypes using this historic wet plate method. Each tintype he produces is one of a kind, handmade from start to finish. Please join me in welcoming Robb Kendrick.
Well, thank you, Carla, and thanks to everybody for showing up tonight. I want to thank, Pam Thomas, of course, and Frostbank for, making this Revealing Character project a reality, and deciding on the Wittliff collection for it to be the permanent home. It keeps the entire body of work together, so every image that appears in the book will always be here, which is great to know that my kids, and if I have grandkids someday, can come back here and take a look at it. So that's appreciated. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate Bill and Sally Wittliff for their support and friendship over the years. It means a lot to have somebody that supports photography and of a lot of great people, and to be included in this collection is an honor, so thank you very much. I guess I'll just start out by explaining a little bit about what the tintype process is. I mean, it was a first American contribution to photography. It was patented in 1856, and it really represents historically images of working class people or rural people, because people in a city that were wealthy would go to a proper photo studio and have a glass plate negative made and a print made. So photography was more of a working class photography medium that was available and affordable to many people. And also photographers would travel from town to town because the images that are made immediately, so they could be delivered immediately. And that made it accessible and easy for people to do it from place to place and deliver them, as opposed to making prints and coming back later. So any of the tintype images you see that are historic really represent people who are more working class people to poor people and people in rural areas. So I started collecting these when I was 19 and was just always fascinated by the quality and the object that you hold in your hand. And so that's basically the history, the layman's history of tintypes. But I'll just start out by showing images. Let's see if I can get this. Next slide? Okay, hold on. All right. And I guess, can we turn the lights down? Is that they're down. Okay, this is lights down. Okay. Okay, I'll start out. I mean, this is the first image I ever made of a cowboy. In 1981, I was at home, returned home from my first semester at college, and I was always interested in people, but I was pretty shy growing up, and so my photography instructor at the time, who was a great person, Jim Newberry, encouraged me to use my photography as a way to get into people's lives and meet people. So when I went home in December of 1981, I went out to one of the feed yards in Hereford, Texas, and where we were living, and I photographed some cowboys. And when I went into this tack room, this cowboy that I photographed seemed very familiar for some reason. And we started talking and found out that when I was 15 years old, he was my boss at the produce department at the grocery store that I worked at. And and his name was Baldemar Reyna. So we started talking, and I came to find out that he felt confined to be working in a corporate environment doing produce, and he always wanted to be a cowboy and grew up on a small place. So anyway, it just this is something that I made 30 years ago, and it is not too much different than in many ways than the images that you see here. It's just a different process. And so I continued with that professor's instruction, to photograph people and get involved in people's lives. And so I went to the JA Ranch in 1981 as well, and I've photographed on that ranch for 30 years. And these images I used as part of my portfolio to get an internship at National Geographic. So the cowboy subject matter has been something I've been interested in, but it's also treated me quite well as far as opportunities that it's led me to. Let's see. A couple other images in that portfolio that got the internship from college were, again, very straight-on pictures in black and white. These are Mennonite kids, and again, using the camera to get in to meet people and be curious about their lives, but just the very straight-on approach, which I was doing when I was 18 and 19 years old. So then I'm going to show a little bit about the process of how I've worked in tintype. When I first started, I shot cactus pads in my cactus garden out in Blanco, and I had a darkroom very close by, and so it was easy to go and process the images I made. But then I wanted to go out and photograph people, and National Geographic gave me a 10-day assignment to go to Nevada and photograph on tintype, Elko, Nevada. So this was my darkroom, my portable darkroom, which you have to have in working with tintypes, and it was a 4-foot wide box with a black sock that I got into, and it had no heat, no ventilation with all the fumes and chemicals I was working with. And I can't tell you, it took an hour and a half to set up, and if I wanted to move 100 yards, I had to break down for 45 minutes, move, and then reset up. And twice during that 10-day assignment, thunderstorms came up, and we had to break down all the chemistry and the equipment in full rain, or in one case, a full dust storm. And so after that trip, here's a snowstorm, but after that trip, I had a trailer. I bought a cargo trailer and decided to, because I was pretty committed to the whole tintype process, I bought a cargo trailer that would allow me to move easily and get in from the weather, and but more importantly, be more productive, because I could break down in 7 minutes as opposed to 45 minutes and move. So it was very efficient. But it also allowed me to bring in the subjects that I was photographing, as long as they could stand the smell of the ether, which is pretty prevalent, that I could share the whole experience of making these images, which is, pouring collodion on a metal plate, sensitizing it, going out, making the image, and then immediately coming back to process the image. And the last step of the process, in the developing process, is to put the plate into a tank of potassium ferrocyanide, or potassium cyanide, I'm sorry. And I made a clear box where people could watch the image turn from a negative to a positive, and it was always, I always found it fascinating, and the subjects did too, so it was just a great environment. And these images are all made, I use an 8x10 camera that's adapted to take 5x7 inch plates. And so anytime, people are pretty familiar these days with camera phones and 35 millimeter cameras, but when you pull out an 8x10 camera, people just respond to you differently, period. It's a totally different experience. They engage you, they engage the camera differently. And a lot of people look at 19th century photographs and think that people were pretty unhappy because nobody smiles in the pictures, hardly. And I think the reality is that when the exposures tend to be 7, 8 seconds and up to a minute and a half or 2 minutes, it's hard to hold a natural smile for that period, or any smile for that period of time. So it's not that their lives were difficult. Really, if you were living in 1888, you were at the height of, history at that point. Just like, probably in 200 years, people will look back at us and think, oh, those poor people, they suffered a lot. They didn't have X, Y, or Z. So these people weren't probably unhappy. They just dealt with what they had. I don't know if you can read this, but after the Revealing Character project, I mean, every project, you never really have regrets about anything that happens. Anything that happens that isn't ideal turns into a time that you evolve into something different. And, I remember coming back from the Revealing Character project, and I had interviewed people and written down the notes of their interviews, and then trying to get faces and names all ID'd correctly was a little bit of a nightmare, because I wasn't smart enough at the time to take a digital camera with me. And so on the next round, I took a digital camera, an eraser board, and photographed everybody with an eraser board, so I had clear ID on them. But when I went into the darkroom, a lot of times these cowboys would take the eraser board and write messages, shoot pictures doing crazy stuff, and I wouldn't find out for days later until I downloaded. So I was up in Montana, and I ran into Tom Morehouse on the left, who I've known since 1987, and John Welch on the right, who's both Texas cowboys. John's at Spade Ranch, and I ran into them in Montana. They were picking up their calves that they had summered up there. And anyway, they wrote this funny message. And John on the right, when I was on the Revealing Character project, John, I ran into him at one of these ranch rodeos, and they had a chuck wagon area set up. And John was sitting there with a Spade chuck wagon. And I said, you got any real cowboys around here? Because he was all decked out and just did not look real. And he said, what, I'm not real enough for you? And then I saw him 2 years later, and he was still pissed off about it, but in a good way, So he still loved me. But
we can't see the sign.
the sign, I'm sorry, it says, "We love you, Rob." And I actually ran into Tom in January at the airport in Austin. Actually, he was going out to Kentucky to see some horses, but he was on a cell phone, and I'm going to play an audio clip of Tom here in a minute. And Tom's voice is very unique. And so I see this guy at a table with a cowboy hat on, which in Austin's not a rare sight. But I heard this voice, and it was early in the morning at 7 a.m. And I just walked up, and I kicked the bottom of the chair, and I said, "Tom Morehouse, what are you doing?" And he just looked up. But, he's a funny guy. So these next two pictures are from the Elko, Nevada project I did for National Geographic that I shared with Brian Jesse when I got back. And that kind of got his thoughts going, and he and Mark and Pam all got together. And it, like Pam said, it wasn't something that they saw it and it just happened in a week. It was something that they saw, and it was a very, slow process, but that's good sometimes. I mean, taking it slow is fine. So these two images were two that Brian shared with Pam. Okay, so the next, Tom Bowerman, who's actually here tonight. Stand up, Tom. He's on the cover, as is Charles, and where's Charles at? Charles is standing. I can't recognize him without his hat on. Charles and Robert, who are also in the Revealing Character book. Anyway, I'm going to do this. I'm just going to talk a little bit about, or I'm not going to talk. I'm going to play audio clips. Again, evolving after the Revealing Character project. At the end, not that I had regrets about the interviews that I did, but I just remember fondly so many of the stories that these men and women shared with me that, writing it down is one thing, but hearing the voices, I mean, the way they speak is so rich that on the National Geographic project that I did, where I traveled from Mexico to Canada and drove 41,000 miles documenting cowboys and tintype, I decided to use audio just because it was probably a richer experience in the end. So, Lee, if you can hit the audio. Okay.